The afternoon sun was bright and warm as Dr. Keisha Williams drove through her neighborhood. She had just finished a long shift at the hospital where she worked as a pediatric surgeon. Her mind was on dinner plans and helping her daughter with homework. The streets were quiet, lined with neat houses and green lawns. This was her home, the place where she felt safe. Suddenly, she saw flashing lights in her rearview mirror. A police car was right behind her. Keisha's heart sank. She had not been speeding. She had stopped at every stop sign. She always drove carefully. Still, she pulled over to the side of the road and put her car in park. She took a deep breath and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. Her mother had taught her this years ago. Her father had taught her too. Always be calm. Always be respectful. Always keep your hands visible. These were rules that Black families taught their children. Rules born from fear and experience. The officer walked up to her window slowly. He was a white man in his late 40s with a thick build and cold eyes. His name tag read Detective Morrison. Keisha rolled down her window and gave him a small, polite smile. "Good afternoon, officer," she said in a calm voice. "Is there a problem?" Morrison looked at her without smiling back. His eyes moved over her face, then to the inside of her car. "License and registration," he said flatly. "Of course," Keisha replied. She reached slowly for her purse, making sure to announce each movement. "I'm reaching for my purse now. My license is in my wallet." She handed him her license and registration. Her hands were steady, but her heart was beating fast. Morrison took the documents and stared at them for a long moment. Then he looked at her car, a beautiful black Mercedes that she had worked hard to afford. "This your car?" Morrison asked, his tone suggesting he doubted it. "Yes, sir, it is," Keisha answered. "You sure about that?" He pressed, his eyes narrowing. Keisha felt a flash of anger but kept her voice even. "Yes, I'm sure. It's registered in my name." "That's my registration you're holding." Morrison walked back to his patrol car without explanation. Keisha sat in her car, waiting. 5 minutes passed, then 10. She could see him in her mirror, sitting in his car talking on his radio. Other cars drove past, their drivers glancing at her with curiosity or pity. Finally, Morrison returned to her window. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "May I ask why?" Keisha said carefully. "I don't believe I was speeding or breaking any traffic laws." "I said step out of the vehicle," Morrison repeated, his voice harder now. "Don't make this difficult." Keisha's stomach tightened with fear and frustration. She knew she had done nothing wrong, but she also knew that arguing with a police officer could turn dangerous quickly. She opened her door and stepped out onto the sidewalk. "Is there a specific reason you pulled me over?" she asked again, trying to remain professional. Morrison ignored her question. "Put your hands on the car," he said. "Officer, I'm a doctor. I just finished my shift at Memorial Hospital. I was driving home. I haven't broken any laws." Keisha's voice remained calm, but inside she was screaming. "Hands on the car. Now." Morrison's hand moved toward his belt, a silent threat. Keisha placed her hands on the hood of her Mercedes. The metal was warm from the sun. She felt humiliated as Morrison began to search her, his hands rough and impersonal. Tears threatened to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not cry, not here, not in front of him. Morrison then opened her car door and began searching inside. He went through her glove compartment, looked under her seats, and opened her purse without permission. Keisha watched in disbelief. "You need a warrant to search my vehicle," she said quietly. "I have reasonable suspicion," Morrison shot back, though he offered no explanation of what that suspicion was based on. He pulled out her doctor's badge from her purse and looked at it with something like surprise. "You're a doctor?" he said as if the idea was impossible. "Yes, I am. Pediatric surgeon," Keisha replied, meeting his eyes. Morrison tossed the badge back into her purse carelessly. He continued his search but found nothing because there was nothing to find. No drugs, no weapons, no evidence of any crime. Just a tired doctor trying to get home. As he searched, a car slowed down nearby. Morrison looked up sharply and the car drove on. But across the street, a woman had come out onto her porch. She stood there watching, her phone in her hand. Morrison didn't seem to notice her. After what felt like forever, Morrison finally stepped back. "You people need to understand something," he said, his voice low but clear. "Just because you have a nice car doesn't mean you belong in a neighborhood like this. Someone probably helped you get it. A boyfriend, maybe. Or maybe you're just good at playing the system. Keisha's jaw tightened. The insult was clear. He was suggesting she couldn't have earned her success, that she must have gotten help or cheated somehow. The racism in his words hung in the air like poison. "I bought this car with money I earned as a surgeon," Keisha said firmly. "I work 60 hours a week saving children's lives. I live in this neighborhood because I bought a house here with my husband. We belong here just as much as anyone else." Morrison smirked. "Right, sure you do." He handed her back her license and registration. "Drive carefully, doctor. Wouldn't want you to get into an accident in that expensive car." The way he said doctor made it sound like an insult. He walked back to his patrol car, got in and drove away without another word. No ticket, no warning, no explanation for why he had pulled her over in the first place. Keisha stood on the sidewalk for a moment, shaking. Her professional composure was cracking. She got back into her car and gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her hands were trembling now. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. Instead, she took several deep breaths and started her car. As she pulled away from the curb, she saw the woman across the street still standing on her porch. The woman gave her a small nod, her phone still in her hand. Keisha nodded back, not understanding yet what that simple gesture would mean. She drove the last 3 blocks to her house slowly, checking her mirrors constantly. When she finally pulled into her driveway, she sat in her car for several minutes trying to pull herself together. Her daughter would be home from school. Her husband would be home from work soon. She didn't want them to see her like this, shaken and angry and hurt. But as she walked to her front door, Keisha knew she couldn't hide what had happened. This wasn't the first time. It was the 3rd time in 6 months that she had been stopped in her own neighborhood for no reason. Each time the officers had been suspicious, condescending, and disrespectful. Each time she had done nothing wrong. This time felt different, though. This time the officer had crossed a line. His racism had been open and ugly. And this time Keisha decided she was going to do something about it. Keisha walked through her front door and set her purse down on the hall table. Her hands were still shaking slightly. She could hear music coming from upstairs where her 15-year-old daughter Maya was doing homework. The familiar sounds of home usually comforted her, but today they felt distant. She went to the kitchen and started taking out ingredients for dinner. Cooking always helped her think, helped her process difficult emotions. But as she chopped vegetables, she kept seeing Morrison's cold eyes, kept hearing his insulting words. Just because you have a nice car doesn't mean you belong in a neighborhood like this. The front door opened and her husband David came in. He was still wearing his work suit, his tie loosened after a long day. David Williams was the district attorney, a position he had worked toward his entire career. He was a man who believed in justice and the law. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, setting down his briefcase. "How was your day?" Keisha didn't answer right away. She kept chopping, her knife moving faster against the cutting board. David walked into the kitchen and immediately knew something was wrong. He had been married to Keisha for 17 years. He could read her moods like a book. "What happened?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. Keisha put down the knife. She turned to face him, and suddenly all the emotion she had been holding back came flooding out. "I got pulled over again," she said, her voice tight. "3rd time in 6 months, David. 3rd time in our own neighborhood." David's face hardened. "When just now?" "About 20 minutes ago. A Detective Morrison." She said his name like it tasted bitter. "He searched my car without cause. He made comments about how I must have had help buying my Mercedes. He basically said I don't belong here." "He said that?" David's voice was low and angry. Not in those exact words, but the message was clear. Keisha wrapped her arms around herself. "He was so disrespectful, David. He treated me like a criminal. I showed him my medical badge and he acted surprised that I was a doctor. Like he couldn't believe it." David pulled her into his arms. He could feel her trembling. His wife was one of the strongest people he knew. She performed delicate surgeries on children, made life or death decisions every day, and handled immense pressure with grace. But racial profiling had a way of breaking down even the strongest people. "Morrison," David said quietly, more to himself than to Keisha. He knew that name. Detective James Morrison had been on the force for 20 years. David had heard rumors about him, whispers of complaints that never went anywhere. But he had never looked into it deeply. Maya came downstairs, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Mom, can you help me with my chemistry homework?" She stopped when she saw her parents. What's wrong? Keisha wiped her eyes quickly and forced a smile. Nothing, baby. I just had a long day. Let me finish dinner and then I'll help you, okay? Maya looked between her parents, not convinced. At 15, she was old enough to sense when something was really wrong. Okay, she said slowly, then went to the living room. After dinner, after Maya had gone to bed, David and Keisha sat together in their home office. David had been quiet all evening, thinking. Keisha could see the wheels turning in his mind. I know what you're thinking, she said, but I don't want you to do anything that could look like favoritism or abuse of power. He violated your rights, Keisha. He profiled you. He searched your car without probable cause. David's voice was controlled, but she could hear the anger underneath. I know, but you're the district attorney. If you go after him, people will say it's personal. They'll say you're using your position to settle a score. David stood up and paced the room. So what, we just let it go? Let him keep doing this to you? To other people? I didn't say that, Keisha replied. I'm just saying we have to be careful how we handle this. There was a knock on their door. David opened it to find Maya standing there in her pajamas. I know something happened, she said. I'm not a little kid anymore. Was it the police again? Keisha and David exchanged a look. They had tried to shield Maya from the worst of their experiences with racism, but she was old enough now to understand the world she lived in. Yes, Keisha admitted. I got pulled over today. The officer was rude and disrespectful. That's the third time, Maya said, her voice rising with anger. Why do they keep doing this to you? You haven't done anything wrong. That's a complicated question, sweetheart, David said gently. No, it's not, Maya shot back. It's because she's black, because we're black. That's why they stop her. That's why they don't stop Mrs. Henderson or Mrs. Cooper or any of the other moms in the neighborhood who look like them. The truth of her daughter's words hit Keisha hard. They had tried to give Maya a good life, a safe life, but they couldn't protect her from the reality of racism. The next morning, Keisha was getting ready for work when her doorbell rang. She opened it to find her neighbor, Patricia Chen, standing on the porch with her phone in her hand. Dr. Williams, I'm so glad I caught you, Patricia said. I saw what happened yesterday. I was on my porch and I recorded the whole thing. Keisha's eyes widened. You recorded it? Yes, I hope that's okay. I just felt like something wrong was happening and I thought you might need evidence. Patricia held out her phone. I can send this to you if you want. Keisha took the phone and watched the video. There she was, standing by her car with her hands up, Morrison searching her vehicle. The audio was clear too. She could hear Morrison's insulting comments, could see how he had treated her. Thank you, Keisha said quietly, handing the phone back. Yes, please send it to me. After Patricia left, Keisha sent the video to David. Then she sat at her kitchen table and watched it again. Seeing it from the outside was different than experiencing it. She could see how wrong it was, how unjustified, but she could also see how vulnerable she had been. That evening, David came home early. He had the video pulled up on his laptop. I've been thinking about this all day, he said. I called my most trusted assistant and asked him to pull Morrison's file quietly, just to see if there's a pattern. And? Keisha asked, though she already knew the answer. There's a pattern. 17 complaints over 15 years, all from people of color, all closed without discipline. David's jaw was tight with anger. He's been doing this for years and nothing has been done about it. Keisha felt sick. 17 people. 17 people who were treated the way I was treated, or worse. Some worse, David confirmed. Physical force in a few cases. Unlawful arrests. False charges that were later dropped. How did he get away with it? Keisha demanded. The usual ways. His union protects him. His fellow officers cover for him. The complaints get buried in paperwork. Victims don't follow through because they're afraid or they don't trust the system. David closed his laptop. But this time is different. Why? Keisha asked. Because you have evidence. Because you have resources. Because you're not afraid. He took her hand. And because I'm going to make sure this is investigated properly, even if I have to recuse myself from direct involvement. Keisha squeezed his hand. I want to file a complaint. An official complaint. Not just for me, but for all those other people who couldn't or didn't. Are you sure? David asked. This is going to get ugly. The media will be all over it. His union will fight back. There will be people who defend him who say you're lying or exaggerating. I'm sure, Keisha said firmly. I'm a doctor. I save lives. I contribute to this community. I pay my taxes and follow the law. And I still get treated like a criminal in my own neighborhood. That has to stop, David nodded slowly. Okay, then we do this the right way. You file the complaint with Internal Affairs. I recuse myself to avoid any appearance of impropriety. But I'll make sure the investigation is thorough and fair. What if nothing happens? Keisha asked quietly. What if they protect him like they've protected him before? Then we go public, David said. We release the video. We make sure everyone knows what kind of officer Morrison is. And we push for systemic change, not just individual accountability. That night, Keisha couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about those 17 other complaints. 17 other people who had been humiliated and violated by Morrison. How many more were there who hadn't filed complaints at all? How many people had Morrison stopped and harassed over 20 years? She thought about her daughter, too. Maya was starting to drive soon. Would Morrison or officers like him pull her over? Would they treat her with the same contempt and suspicion? The thought made Keisha's blood run cold. By morning, her mind was made up completely. She was going to file that complaint and she was going to see it through no matter what happened. Not just for herself, but for Maya, and for every other person who had been targeted by Morrison's racism. She was going to fight back. Monday morning came with gray clouds and the promise of rain. Keisha sat in her car in the parking lot of the Internal Affairs office building. She had taken the morning off from the hospital, something she rarely did. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she stared at the building entrance. This was it. Once she walked through those doors and filed her complaint, there was no going back. The thought both terrified and empowered her. She picked up her phone and called David. I'm here, she said when he answered. You don't have to do this alone, David reminded her. I can come with you. No, you need to stay separate from this. We talked about it. Keisha took a deep breath. I'll be okay. I have the video. I have the facts. I'll be okay. Call me when you're done, David said. I love you. I love you too. Keisha got out of her car and walked into the building. The Internal Affairs office was on the 3rd floor. A receptionist greeted her with a polite smile and asked her to fill out some forms. Keisha's hand shook slightly as she wrote, but her handwriting remained neat and clear. After 20 minutes, an investigator named Lieutenant Sarah Chen called her back to a small office. Chen was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional manner. She asked Keisha to tell her everything that had happened. Keisha spoke, for 30 minutes describing every detail of her encounter with Morrison. She showed Chen the video that Patricia had recorded. As Chen watched, her expression grew more serious. This is the 3rd time you've been stopped in your neighborhood? Chen asked. Yes. The first 2 times I didn't file complaints. I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they had legitimate reasons. Keisha's voice was steady. But after watching this video, I know I wasn't overreacting. Detective Morrison violated my rights and treated me with clear racial bias. Chen nodded slowly. I'm going to be honest with you, Dr. Williams. Detective Morrison has been the subject of complaints before. But I want you to know that your complaint will be taken seriously. We will conduct a thorough investigation. How many complaints? Keisha asked. Chen hesitated. I can't discuss other cases with you, but I can tell you that your complaint is not the first. Keisha left the Internal Affairs office feeling both relieved and anxious. She had done it. She had filed the official complaint. Now she had to wait and see what would happen next. Meanwhile, David was at his office with his most trusted assistant, Jennifer Park. Jennifer had been working with David for 5 years. She was smart, thorough, and had an unshakable commitment to justice. I need you to look into something for me, David said, closing his office door. But this has to stay between us for now. Of course, Jennifer replied. Detective James Morrison. I need you to pull every complaint filed against him, every incident report, every case he's worked on for the past 15 years. David sat down at his desk. My wife filed a complaint against him this morning for racial profiling and unlawful search. Jennifer's eyes widened. I'm so sorry. Is she okay? She's strong. But this isn't just about her anymore. If Morrison has a pattern of this behavior, I want to know about it, and I want to know how he's gotten away with it for so long. Jennifer got to work. Over the next 3 days, she compiled a file that made David's blood boil. 17 complaints from people of color. Patterns of stops in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods. Multiple cases where charges were filed but later dropped. Witnesses who claimed Morrison had planted evidence or lied in his reports. But what was most disturbing was how each complaint had been handled. Some were dismissed for lack of evidence. Others were closed because the complainant didn't follow through, often because they were intimidated or afraid. A few resulted in Morrison getting verbal warnings but no real discipline. How is this possible? David asked, reading through the files. How does someone with this many complaints stay on the force? His union is very strong, Jennifer explained, and he has friends in high places. The police chief is an old friend of his. Several of the senior officers worked with him when they were rookies. They protect him. David leaned back in his chair, his mind working. What about the cases he worked? Any wrongful convictions? I'm still looking into that, Jennifer said. But there are at least 4 cases where people pled guilty to avoid trial, even though they claimed they were innocent. All people of color. All cases where Morrison was the arresting officer. While David and Jennifer were digging into Morrison's past, Keisha was trying to go back to normal life. But normal felt impossible now. Every time she got in her car, she felt anxious. She started taking different routes to the hospital, avoiding the street where Morrison had stopped her. She left for work earlier and came home later, trying to avoid times when police might be patrolling. Her colleagues at the hospital noticed the change in her. Dr. Robert Martinez, one of her closest friends at work, pulled her aside one day. "You okay?" he asked. "You seem distracted." Keisha hesitated, then told him what had happened. Robert listened with growing anger. "That's the 3rd time," he said. "Keisha, you need to report this." "I did. I filed a complaint with Internal Affairs." "Good, because this is ridiculous. You're one of the best surgeons in this hospital. You save kids' lives every day. And some racist cop treats you like a criminal?" Robert shook his head. "Is there anything I can do?" "Just be a friend," Keisha said quietly. "This is harder than I thought it would be." That weekend, Maya asked her mother to take her driving. Keisha had been putting it off since the incident with Morrison, making excuses about being too tired or too busy. But Maya was persistent. "Mom, I need to practice. My driving test is in 2 months," Maya said. Keisha looked at her daughter's eager face and felt her heart break a little. She couldn't let her own fear stop Maya from growing up and becoming independent. But she also couldn't stop thinking about what might happen if a police officer stopped Maya while she was driving. "Okay," Keisha agreed. "But first, we need to have a talk." They sat down at the kitchen table and Keisha explained everything to Maya. She told her about Morrison, about the complaints, about the pattern of racial profiling. She explained how to act if she was ever pulled over by police. Keep your hands visible at all times. Don't make sudden movements. Be polite and respectful, even if the officer is rude to you. Don't argue, don't talk back. Keisha's voice was heavy with the weight of these instructions. And if anything feels wrong, call us immediately. Maya listened with tears in her eyes. "This isn't fair," she said. "Why do I have to worry about this when my white friends don't?" "I know, baby. I know it's not fair, but this is the world we live in right now." Keisha pulled her daughter into a hug. "We're trying to change it. But until we do, you need to know how to stay safe." 2 weeks after Keisha filed her complaint, David received a call from Lieutenant Chen at Internal Affairs. "I wanted to update you on the investigation," Chen said. "We've interviewed Detective Morrison and several witnesses. We've also reviewed the video evidence." "And?" David asked, though he knew he shouldn't be involved directly. "The investigation is ongoing, but I can tell you that we're taking this very seriously. We've also uncovered some concerning patterns in Detective Morrison's history." Chen paused. "I think you should know that there may be other victims who come forward once word gets out about this investigation." David thanked her and hung up. He immediately called Keisha to tell her the news. She was between surgeries, standing in the hospital hallway in her scrubs. Other victims, Keisha repeated softly. David, how many people has he done this to? We don't know yet, but Jennifer has been digging and it's not good. David's voice was grim. Keisha, this is going to get bigger than just your complaint. Are you ready for that? Keisha thought about those 17 complaints, about the people who had been too afraid or too defeated to see their complaints through. She thought about Maya and the world she would grow up in. Yes, she said firmly. I'm ready. Someone has to stop him. Someone has to make sure he's held accountable. That night, Keisha was sitting in her living room when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Is this Dr. Keisha Williams? A woman's voice asked. Yes, who is this? My name is Angela Brown. I heard through a friend that you filed a complaint against Detective Morrison. I filed a complaint against him 3 years ago and nothing happened. They told me there wasn't enough evidence. The woman's voice shook slightly. He pulled me over and searched my car. He said he smelled marijuana, but I don't smoke. He tore apart my car and found nothing. Then he gave me a ticket for a broken taillight that wasn't broken. When I tried to complain, his supervisor told me to drop it or I might face charges for wasting police time. Keisha listened, her heart racing. I'm so sorry that happened to you. After the call, Keisha sat in silence for a long time. Then she called David and told him about Angela. It's starting, David said. Once people know someone is finally standing up to Morrison, others will find the courage to speak up too. Good, Keisha said. Let them come forward. Let everyone know what kind of officer Morrison really is. 3 weeks after filing her complaint, Keisha received a call from Lieutenant Chen asking her to come back to Internal Affairs. When she arrived, Chen's face was serious, but there was something else in her expression too. Determination. Dr. Williams, I wanted to let you know that we've completed the initial phase of our investigation. Chen began. We found enough evidence to recommend that Detective Morrison be placed on administrative leave, pending a full disciplinary hearing. Keisha felt her breath catch. Really? Yes, the video evidence you provided was crucial. But we've also had 3 other individuals come forward with similar complaints about Detective Morrison. Their stories match yours. The pattern is clear. Chen leaned forward. I want to warn you, though. This is going to become public soon. Once Morrison is placed on leave, the media will find out, and his union will fight back hard. I understand, Keisha said, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. That afternoon, the police department issued a statement that Detective James Morrison had been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. The news hit the local media within hours. By evening, it was the top story on every local news channel. But the story wasn't what Keisha expected. Instead of focusing on Morrison's misconduct, several outlets were focusing on who had filed the complaint. The wife of District Attorney David Williams has filed a complaint against veteran Detective James Morrison, one news anchor announced. Some are questioning whether this investigation is politically motivated. Keisha watched the news in her living room, her hands clenched into fists. David stood behind her, his jaw tight with anger. They're making me the story, Keisha said quietly. Not what Morrison did. Not his history of complaints, me. The next morning, the police union held a press conference. The union president, a large man named Frank Donovan, stood at a podium with Morrison beside him. Morrison looked calm, almost bored as cameras flashed. Detective Morrison has served this community with distinction for 20 years, Donovan announced. He has an exemplary record and has received multiple commendations. This investigation is clearly politically motivated. The district attorney's wife files a complaint and suddenly a good officer is suspended. This is an abuse of power, plain and simple. A reporter raised her hand. What about the video evidence showing Detective Morrison searching Dr. Williams' vehicle without probable cause? We haven't seen this alleged video, Donovan replied smoothly. But I can tell you that Detective Morrison followed all proper procedures. He had reasonable suspicion to conduct a search. What was that reasonable suspicion based on? Another reporter asked. Donovan's answer was vague. Detective Morrison observed behavior consistent with possible criminal activity. He acted appropriately to investigate. Morrison stepped up to the microphone. His voice was steady, practiced. I've dedicated my life to keeping this community safe. I treat everyone equally, regardless of their race or background. These accusations are false and hurtful. My family is suffering because of these lies." Keisha turned off the television. She felt sick. Morrison was painting himself as the victim and people were buying it. Her phone started ringing constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Some colleagues from the hospital called to express support. Others were strangely quiet, as if they didn't know what to say. At work the next day, Keisha felt the stares and whispers. Some of her colleagues were supportive, pulling her aside to tell her they believed her and admired her courage, but others were less kind. Dr. Richard Coleman, an older surgeon who had always been cordial to Keisha, cornered her in the break room. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said quietly. "Morrison is a respected officer. This kind of accusation could ruin his career." "He violated my rights," Keisha replied, keeping her voice level. "He has a history of complaints. This isn't about ruining anyone. This is about accountability." "Maybe," Coleman said, stirring his coffee. "Or maybe you just had a bad interaction and you're overreacting because your husband has power." "Not everything is about race, Keisha." The comment stung like a slap. Before Keisha could respond, Dr. Martinez walked into the break room. "That's easy to say when you've never been profiled," Martinez said sharply to Coleman. "I've been stopped by police 4 times in the past 2 years for matching a description. My white colleagues don't have that problem. So yes, Richard, sometimes it is about race." Coleman left without another word. Martinez turned to Keisha. "Don't let him get to you. Some people will never understand because they've never experienced it." That evening, Keisha's lawyer called. His name was James Tucker, a civil rights attorney who David had recommended. Tucker had reviewed all the evidence and was ready to help Keisha navigate the process. "I want you to be prepared," Tucker said. "The union is going to attack your credibility. They're going to dig into your past, looking for anything they can use against you. They might suggest you have a history of making false accusations or that you're difficult to work with." "I've never made false accusations," Keisha protested. "I know, but they'll try to create doubt. They might also bring up the fact that your husband is the DA and suggest this is all orchestrated." Tucker's voice was calm but serious. "I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you so you're prepared. What should I do?" Keisha asked. "Stay calm. Don't engage with the media unless we agree it's strategic. Document everything, and keep living your life. The best thing you can do is show that you're credible, professional, and telling the truth." The weekend brought a new development. Angela Brown, the woman who had called Keisha, decided to go public with her own story. She gave an interview to a local news station, describing her encounter with Morrison 3 years earlier. "He pulled me over for no reason," Angela said on camera. "He searched my car, found nothing, and then gave me a ticket for something that wasn't even broken. When I tried to complain, I was threatened. I was told to keep quiet or face charges. I was scared, so I dropped it. But I've been angry about it for 3 years." The interviewer asked, "Why are you coming forward now?" "Because Dr. Williams had the courage to stand up to him. And because I heard there are others. If we all speak up together, maybe this time something will change." After Angela's interview aired, 2 more people came forward. One was a young man named DeAndre Johnson, who said Morrison had arrested him for loitering when he was waiting for a bus. The charges were later dropped. But DeAndre had spent a night in jail and lost his job. The other was a middle-aged woman named Rosa Gutierrez, who said Morrison had stopped her multiple times in the neighborhood where she cleaned houses. Each time he had questioned whether she had permission to be there, even though she had been working in that neighborhood for 10 years. Their stories created a wave of public attention. Suddenly, the narrative began to shift. This wasn't just about one incident. This was about a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for years. The police chief, a man named Robert Thompson, called a press conference. He stood at the podium looking uncomfortable as cameras flashed. "We take all complaints seriously," Thompson said. "Detective Morrison has been a valued member of our force, but these allegations are concerning. We are conducting a thorough investigation, and if wrongdoing is found, appropriate action will be taken." A reporter shouted out, "Chief Thompson, isn't it true that Detective Morrison has had 17 complaints filed against him over 15 years? Why wasn't action taken before?" Thompson's face reddened. "I can't comment on specific details of past complaints, but I can assure you that we have procedures in place to address misconduct." Those procedures clearly didn't work, another reporter called out. The press conference ended quickly after that. David watched it from his office with Jennifer. They had prepared a statement making clear that David was recused from any prosecution decisions involving Morrison, but that he fully supported a thorough and fair investigation. The union is going to come after you, Jennifer warned. They're going to say you're using your position to persecute Morrison. Let them, David said. I've done everything by the book. I've recused myself. The investigation is being conducted by Internal Affairs, not my office. They can complain all they want. At home that night, Keisha found Maya looking at something on her phone. When Keisha got closer, she saw it was an article about the Morrison case. The comment section was brutal. Mom, don't read those, Maya said quickly, trying to close her phone. But Keisha had already seen some of the comments. She's just playing the race card. Her husband is the DA. Of course she thinks she's above the law. Probably got stopped because she was doing something suspicious. The words hurt, even though Keisha knew they came from strangers who didn't know her or what had really happened. There are good comments too, Maya said, scrolling down. Look, this person says you're brave. And this one says thank you for speaking up. And this person has their own story about being profiled. Keisha hugged her daughter. When did you get so wise? I learned from you, Maya replied. The next week, Keisha's lawyer called with news. Morrison's team has offered a settlement. If you drop the complaint, he'll agree to retire early with full benefits. No admission of guilt. No public apology. Just a quiet retirement. Keisha felt anger surge through her. So he gets to walk away like nothing happened? That's usually how these things end, Tucker admitted. The department wants to make this go away. Morrison wants to save face. They think you'll take the deal because it's easier than fighting. What happens if I don't take it? Keisha asked. Then this goes to a full disciplinary hearing. It will be public. Morrison's lawyers will cross-examine you. They'll try to discredit you and the other witnesses. It will be stressful and potentially painful. Tucker paused. But if we win, Morrison could be fired. And more importantly, it could lead to real reforms in how the department handles complaints. Keisha didn't hesitate. I'm not taking the deal. This isn't about me getting some kind of settlement. This is about making sure Morrison can't do this to anyone else. Tucker was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I was hoping you'd say that. Let's take this all the way. That night, Keisha called Angela, DeAndre, and Rosa. She told them about the settlement offer and her decision to reject it. She also told them that if they wanted to participate in the disciplinary hearing, they could. All three agreed without hesitation. They were tired of being silent. They were ready to tell their stories in public and demand accountability. As Keisha hung up the phone, David came into the room. You're sure about this? He asked. It's going to get ugly. I'm sure, Keisha said. Morrison thought he could intimidate me into backing down. He was wrong. She looked out the window at her neighborhood, at the streets she should feel safe on. She thought about all the times Morrison had stopped people like her, all the times he had abused his power and gotten away with it. Not anymore. This time, Detective James Morrison was going to face consequences for his actions. The morning after Keisha rejected the settlement offer, her lawyer James Tucker called with an idea. The video your neighbor recorded is powerful evidence, Tucker said. I think we should release it to the public. Right now, Morrison and his union are controlling the narrative. They're making this about politics and personal vendettas. But if people see what actually happened, they'll understand this is about civil rights and police accountability. Keisha felt nervous about the idea. Making the video public meant exposing her humiliation to the world. Everyone would see her standing by her car, being searched and insulted by Morrison. But Tucker was right. People needed to see the truth. Okay, she agreed. Let's do it. Tucker released the video to the media that afternoon with a statement from Keisha. Within hours, it was everywhere. Local news stations played it on repeat. National news picked it up. Social media exploded with reactions. The video showed everything clearly. Morrison pulling over Keisha for no apparent reason. His aggressive tone when asking for her license. His order for her to get out of the car. The search of her vehicle without permission. And most damning, his comment about her not belonging in the neighborhood and suggesting someone else must have helped her buy her car. Public opinion shifted dramatically. Even people who had been skeptical before couldn't deny what they saw on the video. The racial profiling was obvious. The violation of her rights was clear. "This is disgusting," one commentator said on television. Dr. Williams was calm and cooperative. She did everything right. And Detective Morrison treated her like a criminal for no reason other than the color of her skin. The police union tried to do damage control, but the video made their job nearly impossible. Frank Donovan gave another press conference, his tone more defensive now. "The video doesn't show the complete context," he claimed. "There were reasons for the stop that aren't visible on camera." "What reasons?" a reporter demanded. Donovan couldn't give a clear answer. His vague responses only made things worse. Meanwhile, more victims began coming forward. It started with Angela, DeAndre, and Rosa. But after the video went viral, others found the courage to speak up. A college professor named Marcus Thompson contacted Tucker's office. He said Morrison had pulled him over 3 times while he was jogging in his own neighborhood. Each time, Morrison had demanded to know where he lived and accused him of looking suspicious. A business owner named James Rivera said Morrison had questioned him while he was unlocking his own store at 6 in the morning. Morrison had asked for identification and suggested James was attempting to break in, even though James's name was on the store sign. A teacher named Nicole Washington said Morrison had detained her in a grocery store parking lot, claiming her car matched the description of a stolen vehicle. It didn't. Nicole had provided her registration proving she owned the car, but Morrison had kept her there for 30 minutes anyway. Each story was similar. Each victim was a person of color. Each encounter involved Morrison overstepping his authority and treating innocent people with suspicion and contempt. Tucker compiled all these statements and submitted them to Internal Affairs as part of the investigation. The pattern was undeniable now. This wasn't about one bad day or a misunderstanding. This was about a police officer who had systematically targeted people based on their race for 20 years. Jennifer, David's assistant, made another discovery while digging through Morrison's files. She found text messages between Morrison and several other officers. The messages had been obtained through a subpoena in an unrelated case months earlier, but had never been fully examined. "You need to see these," Jennifer said, bringing her laptop to David's office. The text messages were shocking. Morrison and his colleagues shared racist jokes. They used coded language to refer to Black and Latino neighborhoods as problem areas. They bragged about stops and searches, calling it keeping them in line. One exchange was particularly damning. Morrison had texted another officer, "Stopped another one in the Heights today. Same routine. Act confused. Ask where they're going. Search the car. Never find anything, but they know we're watching." Another officer had replied, "Nice. We need to keep that area clean. Too many of them moving in." David read the messages with growing horror. This wasn't just one officer with a problem. This was a network of officers who shared the same prejudices and tactics. "How many officers are involved?" David asked. "At least 5, maybe more," Jennifer replied. They had a group chat where they shared information about people they considered suspicious. All of the people they were tracking were people of color. David knew this changed everything. What had started as a complaint against one officer was now evidence of systemic racism within the police department. He called Chief Thompson immediately. "We need to meet now." Thompson arrived at David's office looking tired and stressed. When David showed him the text messages, the chief's face went pale. "This is bad," Thompson said quietly. "This is illegal," David corrected. "These officers were targeting people based on race. They were sharing information to coordinate their harassment. This is conspiracy to violate civil rights." Thompson rubbed his face with his hands. "If this gets out, it will destroy public trust in the department." "It's already out, Robert. The Williams video has been seen by millions of people. Those other victims are telling their stories on the news every night." David leaned forward. "You have a choice. You can get ahead of this by taking strong action now, or you can try to cover it up and make it worse." "What are you suggesting?" Thompson asked. "Fire Morrison. Discipline the other officers involved in this group chat. Announce real reforms, bias training, civilian oversight, changes to how complaints are handled." David's voice was firm. "Show people that you're serious about accountability." Thompson was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "The union will fight me every step of the way." "Let them fight," David replied. "The evidence is on your side. The public is on your side. Do the right thing." While David was meeting with the chief, Keisha was at the hospital dealing with her own challenges. The attention from the Morrison case was affecting her work. Patients asked about it. Other doctors had opinions. Some were supportive. Others thought she should have handled it privately. Dr. Coleman approached her in the hallway between surgeries. "I hope you're happy," he said coldly. "You've turned a personal dispute into a circus that's damaging the whole community." "A personal dispute?" Keisha repeated, her anger rising. "A police officer violated my constitutional rights. He has a 20-year history of doing the same thing to other people. That's not personal. That's a pattern of abuse. You could have handled it quietly," Coleman insisted. "Instead, you went to the media. You made it political. I released evidence of what happened to me. If that makes people uncomfortable, maybe they should be asking themselves why they're more bothered by the evidence than by the behavior." Keisha's voice was sharp now. "And I didn't make this political. Morrison made it personal when he decided to target me because of my race." Dr. Martinez, who had been listening nearby, stepped in. "Richard, walk away before you say something you'll regret." Coleman left, but his words stuck with Keisha. She knew he wasn't the only one who felt that way. There were people who would always blame the victim for speaking up, rather than blame the abuser for their actions. That evening, Keisha went home exhausted. She found Maya in the living room watching the news coverage of the Morrison case. Another victim was being interviewed, describing their encounter with Morrison. "Mom, there are so many people he did this to," Maya said. "How did he get away with it for so long?" "Because the system protected him," Keisha answered, sitting beside her daughter. "His union protected him. His fellow officers protected him. The people in charge didn't want to deal with the problem, so they ignored it." "But not anymore," Maya said. "Because of you. Not just because of me. Because Angela and DeAndre and Rosa and all the others found the courage to speak up." Keisha put her arm around Maya. "That's how change happens. One person speaks up and it gives others the courage to do the same." The next day brought more revelations. A reporter investigating the Morrison case discovered that several people Morrison had arrested had their charges dropped or were acquitted at trial. In at least 3 cases, judges had thrown out evidence because Morrison's police reports contradicted body camera footage or witness statements. One case involved a young man named Terrell Jackson, who Morrison had arrested for drug possession. At trial, the judge ruled that Morrison had conducted an illegal search. The drugs Morrison claimed to find were never properly logged as evidence. Terrell was acquitted, but only after spending 6 months in jail because he couldn't afford bail. The reporter tracked down Terrell for an interview. "Morrison ruined my life," Terrell said on camera. "I lost my job. I lost my apartment. My family thought I was guilty because a police officer said I was. Even after I was acquitted, people still looked at me differently. And Morrison never faced any consequences." These stories painted a disturbing picture. Morrison hadn't just been profiling and harassing people. He had been arresting them on false charges, destroying their reputations and their lives. Tucker submitted all of this new evidence to Internal Affairs. The investigation file was growing thicker every day. The evidence against Morrison was overwhelming. Frank Donovan, the union president, held another press conference. This time he looked less confident. "Some mistakes may have been made," Donovan admitted carefully, "but Detective Morrison is still a good officer who deserves due process. We should not rush to judgment based on selective evidence and biased reporting." But it was too late for spin control. The evidence was public. The victims were speaking out. And most importantly, people were listening. Chief Thompson called David again. "I'm going to recommend termination," he said. "Morrison's disciplinary hearing is scheduled for next week. But based on the evidence, I'm going to recommend that he be fired." "What about the other officers involved in that group chat?" David asked. "Suspensions and mandatory retraining for now. If we find evidence they violated specific policies or laws, we'll take further action." Thompson sighed. "I'm also announcing the formation of a civilian review board to oversee complaint investigations. And we're implementing new training on bias and proper procedure." "That's a start," David said. "But we need to make sure these reforms actually happen and aren't just window dressing." "I know," Thompson replied. "I've been chief for 8 years and I should have seen this coming. I should have paid more attention to the complaints. That's on me." It was the first time David had heard Thompson take real responsibility. Maybe, just maybe, real change was possible. That weekend, Keisha and David took Maya out to dinner at her favorite restaurant. They were trying to have one normal evening as a family. away from the stress of the Morrison case. But even there, people recognized them. Some offered words of support. Others stared and whispered. One man approached their table. "Dr. Williams, I just wanted to thank you," he said. "My son was stopped by that detective 2 years ago. He was so humiliated and angry, but we didn't know what to do. Because of you, we're filing a complaint now, too." After he left, Maya looked at her mother with pride. "You started something, Mom. You stood up, and now everyone else is standing up, too." Keisha felt tears in her eyes. The stress and pain of the past weeks had been enormous, but hearing that her courage had inspired others made it worth it. Morrison's web of abuse was finally unraveling. And it had started with one woman refusing to stay silent. The disciplinary hearing was scheduled to take place in the city's administrative building. It would be open to the public as required by law. Keisha arrived early with James Tucker, her lawyer. They walked through a crowd of reporters shouting questions and camera flashes going off. Inside, the hearing room was already filling up. Keisha saw Angela, DeAndre, Rosa, and many of the other victims who had come forward. They had all agreed to testify if needed. On the other side of the room sat Morrison with his lawyers and union representatives. He looked straight ahead, his face showing no emotion. The hearing panel consisted of 3 members, a retired judge, a community representative, and a senior police official from another city brought in to ensure impartiality. Chief Thompson was there to present the department's case for termination. The proceedings began with opening statements. Morrison's lawyer, a sharp woman named Catherine Brooks, spoke first. "Detective Morrison has served this community for 20 years without a single sustained complaint against him," Brooks said. "He has commendations. He has solved cases. He has kept people safe. What we have here is a coordinated attack against a good officer by people with an agenda. The district attorney's wife wanted to flex her power, and others jumped on board to cash in or get attention." Keisha felt her anger rise, but Tucker squeezed her hand gently. "Stay calm," his gesture said. Chief Thompson presented next. His statement was direct and damning. The evidence shows that Detective Morrison engaged in a pattern of racial profiling over many years. He violated department policy. He violated citizens' constitutional rights, and he created an environment where other officers felt empowered to do the same. Thompson's voice was firm. "This is not about one incident. This is about systematic abuse of power." Then the evidence began to be presented. Tucker played the video of Morrison stopping Keisha. Even though most people in the room had already seen it, watching it in this formal setting felt different. The room was silent except for Morrison's voice on the video saying, "You people need to understand something." After the video, Tucker called Keisha to testify. She walked to the front of the room, placed her hand on a Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Tucker asked her to describe what happened that day. Keisha spoke clearly and calmly, describing every detail. She explained how Morrison had provided no reason for the stop, how he had searched her car without permission, how he had insulted her and suggested she didn't belong in her own neighborhood. Then Catherine Brooks, Morrison's lawyer, stood to cross-examine her. "Dr. Williams, isn't it true that your husband is the district attorney?" Brooks began. "Yes," Keisha replied. "And you expect us to believe that his position has nothing to do with this complaint?" "My husband recused himself from this case to avoid any conflict of interest. He has followed every ethical rule," Keisha said firmly. "I filed this complaint because my rights were violated, not because of who my husband is." "You drive an expensive car and live in an affluent neighborhood," Brooks continued. "Isn't it possible that Detective Morrison was simply doing his job, investigating potential criminal activity?" "What criminal activity?" Keisha asked. "I wasn't speeding. I wasn't driving erratically. I was simply driving home from work. The only thing suspicious about me was the color of my skin." Brooks tried several more times to undermine Keisha's credibility, suggesting she was oversensitive or had a victim mentality. But Keisha remained composed, answering each question with calm dignity. After Keisha stepped down, Angela testified. She described her encounter with Morrison 3 years earlier, how he had torn apart her car looking for drugs that didn't exist, how he had threatened her when she tried to complain. "I was terrified," Angela said, her voice shaking but strong. "He's a police officer. He has power. I'm just a regular person. I thought if I pushed back he could arrest me or worse." So I stayed quiet for 3 years, and that silence ate at me every day. DeAndre testified next about being arrested for loitering while waiting for a bus. I was on my way to work, he said. I was wearing my work uniform. But Detective Morrison decided I looked suspicious. I spent a night in jail and lost my job. And for what? For standing at a bus stop while black? Rosa described being stopped repeatedly while going to her cleaning jobs. He would ask me if I had permission to be in the neighborhood. Like I needed permission to work. Like I didn't have a right to be there. One by one, the victims told their stories. Each account was different in details but identical in pattern. Morrison had targeted them. He had questioned their right to be in certain places. He had treated them as criminals simply for existing in spaces he thought they didn't belong. The most powerful testimony came from Terrell Jackson, the young man whose drug possession charges had been thrown out by a judge. Terrell was now 25 years old, but the encounter with Morrison had happened when he was 19. Morrison pulled me over and said he smelled marijuana in my car, Terrell testified. I don't smoke. I've never smoked. He searched my car and said he found drugs under my seat. But at trial, the judge said the search was illegal. The drugs were never properly logged as evidence. My lawyer suggested Morrison might have planted them. Morrison's face remained blank, but Brooks objected loudly. That's speculation and has no place in this hearing. The panel chair overruled her. The witness is describing what happened to him. Continue, Mr. Jackson. I spent 6 months in jail because I couldn't afford bail, Terrell continued. My mom used all her savings trying to get me out. I lost my scholarship to community college. My girlfriend left me because she believed I was a drug dealer. Even after I was acquitted, people still looked at me like I was guilty. Morrison took my future away from me, and he never even got a warning. The room was silent when Terrell finished. Even Morrison's lawyers seemed shaken. Then the department presented the text messages. They were projected on a screen for everyone to see. The racist jokes, the coded language, the bragging about stops and searches. Morrison's message about keeping them in line. Brooks tried to argue that the messages were taken out of context, that they were just dark humor between officers dealing with stressful jobs. But the panel members' faces showed they weren't buying it. The final piece of evidence was a statistical analysis that Jennifer had prepared. It showed that Morrison's stops were overwhelmingly of people of color, far out of proportion to the neighborhood demographics or crime rates. It showed that Morrison rarely filed charges that stuck, suggesting his stops lacked probable cause. It showed that complaints against Morrison were dismissed at a much higher rate than complaints against other officers, suggesting bias in how they were handled. The numbers told a story that was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just bad judgment or a few mistakes. This was systematic discrimination backed by data. After 2 full days of testimony and evidence, it was time for closing arguments. Brooks made one last attempt to defend Morrison. My client is not perfect. Perhaps he could have handled some situations better. But firing a 20-year veteran over complaints that were never sustained, over text messages between friends, over statistics that can be interpreted multiple ways, that's not justice. That's a witch hunt. Tucker stood for his closing argument. He looked at each member of the panel directly. Detective Morrison violated the constitutional rights of Dr. Williams and countless others. He profiled them. He harassed them. He arrested them without cause. And he did it for 20 years while the system protected him. Tucker's voice was passionate but controlled. This isn't a witch hunt. This is accountability. Finally, the question before you is simple. Do we want police officers who abuse their power to face consequences? Or do we want to keep protecting them while they destroy lives? The panel retired to deliberate. Keisha, David, and all the victims who had testified waited in the hallway. Reporters surrounded them, but they didn't speak. They just waited. After 4 hours, the panel called everyone back into the room. The retired judge who chaired the panel stood to read their decision. We have carefully considered all the evidence presented in this hearing. We have reviewed Detective Morrison's service record. We have listened to the testimony of the witnesses. And we have examined the policies and procedures of the police department. The room was completely silent. Keisha held David's hand tightly. We find that Detective James Morrison engaged in a pattern of racial profiling. He violated department policies regarding stops, searches, and arrests. He violated the constitutional rights of citizens. And his conduct brought discredit to the police department and undermined public trust. Morrison's face finally showed emotion. His jaw tightened and his eyes narrowed. Therefore, we recommend that Detective Morrison be terminated from employment with the police department, effective immediately. We further recommend that his case be referred to the State Attorney General's office for review of potential criminal civil rights violations. The room erupted. Some people cheered. Others gasped. Morrison's lawyers immediately stood to object, saying they would appeal. Morrison himself stood and walked out without a word, his face dark with anger. Outside the building, Keisha stood with the other victims and spoke to reporters. "This isn't about revenge," she said. "This is about making sure that police officers who abuse their power are held accountable. It's about protecting other people from experiencing what we experienced." Angela stood beside her. "For 3 years I thought nothing would ever happen. I thought I didn't matter. But we do matter. Our rights matter. And today proved that." Chief Thompson held his own press conference. He looked tired but determined. Today's decision was difficult but necessary. Detective Morrison's conduct was unacceptable and violated everything we stand for as a police department. But this isn't just about one officer. This is about rebuilding trust with our community. He announced the reforms that would be implemented immediately. A civilian review board would oversee all complaint investigations. Officers would be required to complete extensive bias training. Body cameras would be mandatory on all stops, and any officer with more than 3 sustained complaints would face automatic review. "We failed to act when we should have," Thompson admitted. "That changes now." That evening, Keisha sat with David and Maya in their living room. The television was playing news coverage of the hearing, but they had the sound turned down. "Is it really over?" Maya asked. "The hearing is over," Keisha said. "Morrison will appeal, so there's more to come. But the hard part is done." David squeezed his wife's shoulder. "You did something important today. You and all those other people who testified. You made a difference." Keisha thought about all the people who had come forward. They had been scared, angry, and hurt. But they had found the courage to speak up. Together they had brought down an officer who thought he was untouchable. It wasn't complete victory. Morrison would fight the decision. Some people would always believe he was treated unfairly. The problems of racism and police misconduct were bigger than one officer or one department. But today at least justice had been served. And that was a start. 3 months after the disciplinary hearing, the official termination of Detective James Morrison was finalized. His appeals had failed. The evidence against him was too strong, too clear, too well documented. The State Attorney General's office announced they would be filing criminal charges against him for violating civil rights laws and falsifying police reports. Morrison's fall was complete. The officer who had terrorized people for 20 years, who had thought himself untouchable, now faced not only the loss of his job but possible prison time. His pension was in jeopardy. His reputation was destroyed. But for Keisha and the others who had fought for this outcome, Morrison's downfall was only part of the story. The bigger question was whether real change would come from it. The civilian review board that Chief Thompson had promised was now operational. It consisted of 5 community members from diverse backgrounds, including a retired teacher, a small business owner, a civil rights attorney, a social worker, and a college student. They had the power to investigate complaints against police officers and recommend disciplinary action. The board's first major review examined the cases of the 5 other officers who had been part of Morrison's text message group. Their texts showed they had shared Morrison's attitudes and tactics. The board recommended suspensions, bias training, and close monitoring. 2 of the officers chose to resign rather than face the board's scrutiny. David worked with community leaders to ensure the reforms were more than just words on paper. He helped draft new policies that required officers to document the specific reasons for every traffic stop. He pushed for regular audits of stop data to identify patterns of racial profiling. He advocated for increased funding for de-escalation training and mental health services for officers. "We can't just punish bad behavior," David said at a community meeting. "We have to reward good behavior. We have to create a culture where officers who treat everyone with respect are valued and promoted, not officers who make the most arrests, regardless of how they make them." The changes weren't easy. The police union fought against many of the reforms. Some officers complained that they were being handcuffed and couldn't do their jobs effectively. There were protests and press conferences and heated debates. But slowly, things began to change. The number of complaints about racial profiling decreased. More complaints that were filed were actually investigated thoroughly. Officers who violated policies faced real consequences, not just warnings. For Keisha, returning to normal life was harder than she expected. The months of fighting Morrison, of testifying, of dealing with media attention had taken a toll. She found herself anxious in situations that used to feel routine. Driving still made her nervous, especially when she saw police cars. Her colleague, Dr. Martinez, noticed and pulled her aside one day at the hospital. "You know, there's no shame in talking to someone," he said gently. "What you went through was traumatic. A lot of people who experience racial profiling develop something like PTSD. Keisha had been so focused on fighting for justice that she hadn't thought about her own healing. She took Martinez's advice and started seeing a therapist who specialized in racial trauma. The sessions helped her process not just the incident with Morrison, but years of smaller indignities and microaggressions she had experienced. "What you did was incredibly brave," her therapist told her. "But bravery doesn't mean you're not affected by what happened. It's okay to acknowledge the impact." As Keisha worked on her own healing, she also became an advocate for others. She started speaking at community events about racial profiling and police accountability. She shared her story at schools and churches and town halls. She wanted people to understand that this issue affected real people, successful people, everyday people. One of the most meaningful things she did was create a support network for people who had experienced racial profiling. The group met monthly at a local community center. They shared their stories, offered support to each other, and organized advocacy efforts. Angela became a co-leader of the group. She had found her voice through the Morrison case and wasn't ready to be silent again. "For so long I felt alone," she told the group at one meeting. "I thought it was just me, that maybe I'd done something wrong. But now I know I wasn't alone, and none of us were wrong. We were targeted, and that wasn't our fault." DeAndre, who had lost his job after his false arrest, received help from the group in finding new employment. He was now working at a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated people re-enter society. "I know what it feels like to have your opportunities taken away because of a police officer's prejudice," he said. "I want to help others get their lives back." Rosa continued her cleaning business but became an active voice in the Latino community about police relations. She worked with Spanish-language media to share information about people's rights during police encounters. The most unexpected outcome was what happened with Maya. Keisha's daughter had watched her mother fight for justice with fierce determination. She had seen how the legal system could be used both to harm and to help. She had witnessed the power of speaking truth to power. Maya, who had been planning to study medicine like her mother, changed her mind. "I want to be a civil rights lawyer," she announced one evening at dinner. "Like Mr. Tucker. I want to help people fight back against injustice." David smiled with pride. "That's a noble calling. It's not easy, but it's important work. I learned from the best," Maya said, looking at both her parents. "Mom showed me what courage looks like, and Dad showed me how to use the law to create change." 6 months after Morrison's termination, Terrell Jackson invited Keisha to a ceremony at the community college he had once attended. He was graduating, finally completing the degree that Morrison's false arrest had interrupted years earlier. "I almost gave up," Terrell told Keisha after the ceremony. "After everything that happened, I felt like the system was rigged against me. Why try when you can be pulled down at any moment? But watching what you did, seeing Morrison finally face consequences, it gave me hope. If you could fight back and win, maybe I could rebuild my life." Terrell had plans to transfer to a 4-year university to study criminal justice. "I want to be part of fixing the system," he said, "from the inside." Stories like Terrell's reminded Keisha why the fight had been worth it. It wasn't just about punishing Morrison. It was about giving people hope that justice was possible, that speaking up could make a difference. The Morrison case also inspired changes beyond their city. Other communities heard about what happened and started examining their own police departments. Activists used the case as an example of what accountability could look like. Some cities implemented similar reforms, creating civilian review boards and strengthening complaint processes. national civil rights organizations reached out to Keisha, asking her to speak at conferences and help train other communities on how to advocate for police reform. She balanced this work with her medical career, using vacation time to travel and speak. "You have a platform now," David reminded her. "Not everyone who experiences what you experienced has the resources and support you had. You can use your voice to help them." 1 year after the initial traffic stop, Keisha drove down the street where Morrison had pulled her over. She did it deliberately, consciously, as a way of reclaiming that space. Her hands didn't shake this time. Her heart didn't race. She had taken back her sense of safety and belonging. She pulled over at the exact spot where Morrison had stopped her and sat there for a moment. She thought about how much had changed in 1 year. Morrison was gone. Reforms were in place. Victims had found their voices. Lives had been changed. But she also knew the work wasn't finished. Morrison was one officer in one city. Racial profiling was a national problem. Police misconduct was systemic. The criminal justice system still disproportionately harmed people of color. There would be more fights ahead. More cases to pursue. More reforms to demand. More people who needed support and advocacy. But for today, sitting in her car in her own neighborhood, Keisha allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. That evening, the Williams family celebrated the anniversary of Keisha's courage in their own way. They invited all the victims who had testified along with their families. They invited Patricia Chen, the neighbor who had recorded the video. They invited James Tucker and his team. They invited community leaders who had supported the reforms. It wasn't a party exactly. It was more of a gathering of people who had been through something difficult together and had come out stronger. As Keisha looked around her backyard at all these people talking, laughing, sharing stories, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had started this journey alone, humiliated on the side of a road. But she hadn't ended it alone. She had found a community of people committed to justice and change. Chief Thompson made a surprise appearance at the gathering. Some people were uncomfortable with his presence, given his role in the system that had protected Morrison for so long. But Thompson approached Keisha directly. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I was chief for years while Morrison was harassing people. I should have seen it. I should have stopped it. That failure is on me." Keisha appreciated the apology, though she knew words alone weren't enough. "What matters now is that you're committed to making sure it doesn't happen again," she said. "I am," Thompson replied. "Every day, I think about how we failed those 17 people who complained about Morrison. I think about how many others never complained at all. That motivates me to do better." As the sun set and the gathering wound down, David found Keisha standing alone in the garden. He put his arm around her. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," Keisha said, leaning into him. "I was just thinking about how one moment can change everything. That traffic stop changed my life, but I got to choose how it changed me. I could have stayed quiet and scared. Instead, I fought back. And look at what came from it." "You inspired a lot of people," David said, "including me." They stood together, in comfortable silence, watching their daughter Maya laugh with Terrell and some of the other young people at the gathering. The next generation was learning from their experiences, preparing to carry the work forward. Morrison was gone, but the fight for justice continued. The Williams family had learned that meaningful change didn't happen quickly or easily. It required courage, persistence, community, and unwavering commitment to what was right. But it was possible. Real, lasting change was possible. And that knowledge, more than anything else, gave them hope for the future. As the last guests left and the family cleaned up, Keisha reflected on the journey. She had been harassed by a racist cop. She could have been just another victim, another statistic, another person crushed by a broken system. Instead, she had fought back. She had found her voice and used it to speak for others who couldn't speak for themselves. She had turned her pain into purpose, her anger into action, her fear into fuel for change. And in doing so, she had proved something important. That one person standing up can spark a movement. That justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. That the arc of the moral universe might be long, but when people push, it bends toward justice. Detective James Morrison had harassed the wrong woman. He had thought she would be another easy victim, someone he could intimidate into silence. He had been very, very wrong. And because of his mistake, because of Keisha's courage, many people's lives were better. Many future victims were protected. Many wrongs were made right. That night, Keisha slept peacefully for the first time in a year. Tomorrow she would return to her work as a surgeon, saving children's lives. Tomorrow she would continue her advocacy work, fighting for justice. Tomorrow she would keep living her life fully and freely in her own neighborhood. But tonight she simply rested, knowing that she had made a difference that would last long after her own story faded from headlines. That was enough. That was everything.